Okay, so now we're going to move on to hear from Deney van Rooyen about her research in inclusive infrastructure development with purpose. So putting people at the center. Deney is a civil engineer turned development consultant with experience ranging from construction and consulting to app development and research. She is passionate about the developmental potential of infrastructure, the capabilities it releases, and the opportunities it creates when people are at the center. She's pursuing a master's in inclusive innovation with her research in inclusive infrastructure development and the social purpose of infrastructure. Thanks, Deney, for joining us. Over to you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. It is such an honor to be here, and I'm quite excited about this conversation. It's incredible to see this emerging from the engineering space, because I think a lot of young engineers have kind of resonated with this need to dig a bit deeper into our humanity, and it's wonderful to see this kind of cross function between design and engineering as well. So let me share my presentation with you, and then we can get started. Great. Okay, so today I hope to take us on a bit of a journey, a bit of a philosophical journey, okay? This journey will hopefully prompt reflection and action from our side. I want to start by looking at infrastructure and its role in human development as we orientate ourselves around a more human-centered design philosophy. Then, because we tend to be a very pragmatic bunch of people, I hope to look at how HCD becomes praxis. And for this, I'd like to consider two levers of change, one being the value chain, and the other being our means of engagement. And then if I don't talk too much, we'll have some time to invite us into a bit of dialogue as well. So to kick this off, I would like to think about what is infrastructure and what is it for? Joseph Bodronia captures this well. He speaks about how infrastructure is composed of countless interconnected, civilly engineered systems. It undergirds our daily life and propels the flow of commerce. It enables society to perform. It drives the creation of economic wealth, and it provides our citizens with pathways to productivity and prosperity. I like to think about infrastructure as the constructed elements which facilitate human activity, human relationship, and human purpose. And in this sense, what is development of infrastructure if not human development? Amartya Sen defines human development as the process of enlarging a person's functionings and capabilities to function, the range of things that a person could do and be in her life. Infrastructure facilitates well-being, health, social and economic participation. It effectively facilitates the expansion of choices, of capabilities, and of freedoms. But as we as Zoom conference attendees should well know, some of us experience more freedoms than others. Paul Edwards writes, "To live within the multiple interlocking infrastructures of modern societies is to know one's place in the gigantic systems that both enable and constrain us." What does the infrastructure you have access to tell you about your place in this world and about the place of others? What if, as Joseph Bodronia suggests, our visible public infrastructure reflects who we are as a society and how much we care about the quality of our lives together? What do our planning, designing, financing, and construction practices reflect about who we are and what or whom we care about? And what does the inequity we sit with reflect about how much we care about our lives together? Infrastructure is both a means and an end of development. What we build facilitates life as we know it. And how we build also has social, economic, environmental, and technical implications. One of my favorite definitions of sustainable development, and I'm keen to pick up on this from what both Kate and Prof. Mugendi had said, is by social ecologist C.S. Holling. He defines sustainable development as follows. Sustainability is the capacity to create, test, and maintain adaptive capability. Development is the process of creating, testing, and maintaining opportunity. The phrase that combines the two, sustainable development, thus refers to the goal of fostering adaptive capabilities and creating opportunities. As we at various points in this infrastructure value chain, as we are at these various points, as we consider the critical role of infrastructure in the sustainable development of the world, the capabilities and the opportunities that it presents, Holling's definition actually provides us with quite a useful model to consider at every point in this value chain. Through our public infrastructure and the process of creating it, how might we create, test, and maintain capabilities? How adaptive are our capabilities, our interventions, and our processes to the social context within which we work? And even Prof. Mugendi, he mentioned the skill set that is, that's considered the skill set of the future. And it's interesting to see how much adaptability and flexibility actually come to play in that. And in the context of the socioeconomic transformation that we so desperately require, how might we leverage infrastructure to create, test, and maintain opportunities towards a more just and equitable world? In reflecting on African culture, Steve Biko writes that one of the most fundamental aspects of African culture is the importance we attach to man. Ours has always been a man-centered society. Biko's words imply that a human-centered philosophy to design should actually come as second nature when we're considering African public infrastructure. But public infrastructure in the African context reveals this conflict of culture and of philosophy. For example, it's a development philosophy that led to this map of mercantile Africa, where infrastructure supports export, but it hinders intracontinental development and connection. It's also a design philosophy that has yielded the inequality, and spatial legacy of South Africa. This echoes what philosopher Karl Popper proposes. He says that we all have philosophies, whether or not we are aware of them. The impact of our philosophies upon our actions and our lives is often devastating. Among most designers, whether architects, urban designers, product designers, we meet this concept of design philosophy. And these are the assumptions, foundations, and implications of design. But this concept is actually less common in engineering. And this lack of emphasis on philosophy engineering doesn't mean that it's not there. Engineering education scholar Samuel Bonasso, he says that engineers are in fact masters at the application of Cartesian philosophy. We may do this unknowingly as engineers. Cartesian philosophy is about isolating, segregating, and differentiating the whole into parts and dealing with the parts. This may remind some of us of first-year physics. While this philosophy has driven modern advancement, designing in this way is also responsible for many of society's problems. In the book Engineering Justice, the authors make the point that engineers' identities as designers need to be nurtured in order to better consider the interplay between the technical and the social, and the ethical and social justice implications of their work. Brazilian philosopher and educator Paulo Freire, he speaks about the vocation of becoming more fully human, suggesting that we each have this lifelong calling to deepen our humanity. Many young engineers who I know are actually drawn into this industry precisely because of the impact of the work. They want to use their skills to make a difference, tangible differences in people's lives. They have a real desire to contribute to society. And yet, the industries that young engineers enter has typically, with this world changer mentality, has typically been found to be quite rigid, methodical, and very status quo, far from humane and compassionate. Steve Biko gifted us with these powerful and challenging words that really resonate so beautifully when we have conversations on infrastructure. And for me, this really frames how we are to think about what we build and how we build it. He says that we believe in the long run, the special contribution to the world by Africa will be in this field of human relationship. The great powers of the world may have done wonders in giving the world an industrial and military look, but the great gift still has to come from Africa, and that is giving the world a more human face. So, getting into human-centered design as a praxis. I know for me, in looking at this human-centered design approach, one of the immediate challenges that arose and confronted me is this very long-term, big-scale, high-cost nature of infrastructure itself. In designing products like a new phone, it may make sense that we can go back to users, we can test prototypes, we can incorporate that feedback, but how does that work when we're talking about a 2 billion rand bridge, when we're talking about a road that spans multiple geographies, a dam wall, an electrical power line? I want to share how I've been thinking about this, because I feel that if we have any hope of designing a more human-centered, more inclusive world, there are two fundamental and almost institutional shifts that need to happen. The first is this idea that any one entity can fix a sector. I want to propose that it takes change along the entire value chain. The second is around how we're engaging. Human-centered design doesn't happen in a vacuum. And core to HCD is empathy, co-creation, and really listening to users and to each other. I want to propose that it's going to take a culture of dialogue and relationship building for us to really move this conversation from an idea to a reality. So, meaningful change will take thoughtful innovation from across the value chain, from governments, project sponsors, development agencies, engineers, designers, to contractors and local businesses who execute projects on the ground. Then there's the innovation waiting to spring up from everyday users of infrastructures, from communities, when they're included in ways that unearth potential. We need to be thinking about HCD and infrastructure at its multidimensional, interconnected levels, and Prof. Mugendi and Kate also started to speak to this. At the individual and community level, at an organizational level, at a systemic level, and along the project lifecycle. So I'll share some thoughts on that. At a community and an individual level, I want to suggest that we really reproduce who we are. And something will need to change in us in order for our approach to change. Here lies a very personal journey to be undertaken. As designers and developers, as engineers, we may hold philosophies and assumptions on a personal level about the kind of intelligence, creativity, resources, aspirations, and agency that exists where infrastructure is constructed and experienced. I wonder about what kind of learning might take place, especially if dissenting voices are brought into the room instead of being shut out. At an organizational level, we need to ask ourselves about the culture, the practices, and the norms that are lived out in organizations and how these translate when we engage with stakeholders. For example, do the cultures of our organizations and our project sites reflect the democratic values that we esteem as a society? Or do we revert to military or paternalistic leadership and power dynamics? Are we working on how to deepen empathy internally within our organizations, on our projects, and within the areas that we work? At a systemic level, I believe that we have to believe that it's entirely possible for business as usual to be different in the future than it is today. The concept of a new normal is something we are now in a much better position to conceive than we were even 2 years ago. A systemic view recognizes that change will be demanded from every part of the value chain. Then there's the life of a project. Projects are the way the world changes. These temporal organized efforts are truly the way in which progress is inched forward and humanity is developed. In what ways might project processes and project practices be more inclusive and more humane, from concept to planning to design to procurement and contracting, and let's not leave out ownership, to construction and operations? We need to apply our minds and our hearts to the goal of leaving no one behind. At some of these levels, pockets of change and nudges in the system can be seen from across the value chain. Policy requirements have institutionalized things like contract procurement goals and other socioeconomic goals for public projects. And while these are contentious, they do begin to create an enabling environment for thinking more innovatively about inclusive development. Organizations in infrastructure development are really beginning to think about their impact. This webinar being evidence of something emerging in the consulting environment. Some contractors are thinking about maximizing inclusion and really developing the capacity of SMMEs in the areas that they work in to enhance local benefits. Andrew and Kevin, who will speak today, they represent this change with some of their work in both traditional and non-traditional applications of the profession. Then there's also a shift beginning to take place among donors and financiers of infrastructure, with outcomes-based bonds and social impact bonds beginning to surface. In communities, local communal savings schemes, or stokvals, have been used to develop housing and deliver services. The work of the Victoria Mxenge Collective and the South African Homeless People's Federation are examples of this. Professor Jessica Kaminsky reminds us that the built environment is both collaboratively built and used to solve collective problems. If we imagine infrastructure as a collaborative or even a democratic project, we can also start to think about how we might connect these system nudging efforts. And this leads me to consider the following, the second lever, the fact that it takes a conversation. We seem to struggle to justify the cost of adequately contextualizing our projects and improving engagement processes in the early stages, only to be met with costly, unplanned project delays and interruptions. Service delivery protests, project interruptions, petitions, and other collective actions suggest that people will make themselves heard. For a humanitarian product with a very social goal, we really have a way of contracting, regulating, and designing humanness out of the process in the name of efficiency, or even in the name of service delivery. In a way, it's like we see our humanity as a threat to the very things we build to facilitate humanness. We can't deny that there's a messiness that comes with engaging human beings, and yet messy is kind of who we are. Instead of problematizing protests and dissenting voices, especially when these are representing those whose freedoms are most constrained, what might we learn, and how might engaging with people actually strengthen our development efforts and enhance resilience? Paulo Freire talks about the fact that reality must be transformed together with other people. He says, human existence cannot be silent. To exist humanly is to name the world, to change it. No one can say a true word alone, nor can she say it for another in a prescriptive act which robs others of their words. If it is in speaking their word that people, by naming the world, transform it, dialogue imposes itself as the way by which they achieve significance as human beings. This is a case for human-centered design long before it was cute. This is from the 60s. Dialogue aims to raise our collective awareness of what problems exist. It can unearth the potential and the resources that exist even in constrained environments. A conversation is a two-way street. It involves speaking and listening, giving and receiving, a sharing of ideas and opinions, learning, and a breaking down of hierarchies. Dialogue seeks to build relationship. Facilitating meaningful dialogue is fundamental to humanity. According to Freire, the principles of dialogue, without which it cannot exist, are a profound love for the world and for people, commitment to others, humility, an openness to the contribution of others, to learning, to surrendering our own self-sufficiency, a deep faith in humankind, of which mutual trust can become the consequence. These principles are about as human-centered as it gets, and we have this opportunity to create our future together. Practically, this might look like rethinking public participation, redesigning engagement strategies before and during project stages, and really opening ourselves up to feedback. Deliberately learning from engagements and incorporating learnings into the broader project process, taking longer if it means building deeper, stronger foundations. It might look like creating sustained platforms for dialogue between stakeholders where co-creative strategies and project learnings are pursued with the goal of improving project by project. So to close, In the interest of being inclusive, I want to make sure that none of us feel like we're off the hook here. There's a nation building task required. There's an organizational task required, one of reflection and action, and there are project tasks required. In adapting our approach, we need to explore this at the levels relevant to which we are situated in the world, whether as a government official, as a project manager, a development agency, an engineer, as a CEO. A human-centered future includes each of us and all of us. We also have an invitation to rethink how we relate to one another, to engage because we value each other, for the sake of building relationship, pursuing social cohesion, and allowing room for new networks, pathways, capabilities, and opportunities to inform how development takes place. A human-centered future invites us to listen to each other. Purpose will carry us far. It's so often our why that pushes us beyond our obstacles, our challenges, our disappointments, and our failures. A purpose can really breathe new life into our thoughts and our actions. We're beginning to see this invitation emerge from the world and from each other to dig deep into our why, to let a higher and collective purpose guide us, one of pursuing our own humanity and building a world where everyone is invited and free to become more human. So, on that note, let us set out on a quest for true humanity. Somewhere on the distant horizon, we can see the glittering prize. Let's march forth with courage and determination, drawing strength from our common plight and our brotherhood. In time, we shall be in a position to bestow upon Africa and South Africa the greatest gift possible, a more human face. Thank you.